GameSpot staff have voted and deliberated, and we have decided our game of the year for 2022. And actually, it was quite a runaway victory, wasn't it?
Record time. Yeah, I mean, like it was quick, but a lot of the hard work was ahead of the actual discussion, right? Because we collate the votes, and then we have a system where we weight it depending on where it appears in each person's individual list, etc., etc. Don't want to give away too much of the secret sauce, but this game was by far ahead of pretty much everything else.
Yeah.
A country mile, some might say. The discussion around it was pretty much a given.
It was a given. Yeah. We all knew it was going to be
contender.
Not only a contender, but a big game, both in terms of, you know, what we like around the office, but also in terms of the discourse.
Yeah.
And what, you know, people were going to be talking about when it released earlier this year. What do you think is the thing that set it apart for it to be so easily slide into our #1 spot?
I think the most interesting part of it is like the major, not worry, but like the consideration we had to factor in was it came out very early in the year. And games that come out super early in the year, they kind of naturally have a uphill struggle of making it to that top of the list because recency bias, and also like there's so much space for people to put out games and improve them and react to them and that kind of stuff. So the fact that people were as passionate about it at the end of the year as they were at the beginning says a lot about it, I think.
It wasn't a question for me.
No.
We filled out our top 10. Elden Ring was there right away. It was, usually I work backwards when I make my personal list, but this time I worked from 1 because Elden Ring, easy.
Me too.
Yeah.
I like sort of the idea of FromSoft games more than I think I enjoy playing them because I'm not good. I'm not good enough for a lot of the games.
I mean, I've
beaten Bloodborne. But you know, when it comes to Sekiro, I could never really get the knack of, and I was feeling a little bit discouraged. And so Elden Ring being this huge open world game, and the fact that I devoured it, platinumed it, you know, did pretty much everything I could in that game, came as a surprise to me, and I didn't anticipate an open world game to keep me as hooked as it did all the way through. I thought that I would be, you know, choice paralysis because there was too much in there. I thought I'd get bored, and it was the complete opposite for me. And it was such a memorable experience. We had such a great time, like constant message group threads, Discord threads, who's online, who can help me here, who's doing this, you know, and it became this game that was much bigger than the experience I was having, but it became this thing that we were all kind of doing together. So what were your...
I think for me, it was I wrote this in my write-up for the game, which you can read now on the website, but I don't think there's been a studio that's been as influential on video games as FromSoftware has been in the last, say, decade, around that time. I think you can definitely put a bunch of studios up there, but very few of them have been so influential that they reshape entire genres as well as kind of inspire sub-genres, which is what the FromSoftware games, don't forget, like when Dark Souls came out, there were a lot of Dark Souls copycats. Like pretty much entire games were like reworking their RPG systems to be more like Dark Souls. Then you go to things like, you know, beloved games like Hollow Knight and various other, you know, 2D indie games. FromSoftware's design has had a like momentous impact on the industry. But the more games they put out, the more, I don't want to say ordinary, the more kind of like understood they are.
The more people have an idea of what to expect.
And I think the thing that they expect, what I expected is like they make great games. They make great games in a very specific way. Like regardless of if it's Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, they have a certain design formula or like a set of principles that they adhere to. And a lot of what makes their games impressive and interesting is they have a very heavy level of orchestration, where it's like they can control every variable. They know what a player is going to see, when they're going to see it, how they're likely to react to it, how they're likely to not react to it, and they can play with those kind of dynamics to create these environments. It's kind of like, it's easier to make it interesting for you to walk down a corridor than it is to put you in a field. So the worry always was, how do they evolve that? They can't just carry on doing that. Sekiro was one step where they make it like more combat focused and more like mechanic focused.
Even more controlled.
Yeah,
too,
even
right?
more controlled too. So like when they decided that they were going to do an open world game, and we heard it's going to be open world, the big worry was how do they have that level of orchestration and have that level of control over what you see, when you see, and how you respond to it, and subverting that in a massive environment when you can go away and do anything. And the answer was just make everything amazing, or like just make everything as good as you can, so that no matter where you turn, you're having some sort of meaningful interaction with the world, or you're having some sort of meaningful moment that you can, that will be memorable to you. And that's what Elden Ring excels at, right? It doesn't matter if you're in a dungeon, it doesn't matter if you're going to a legacy dungeon, and like Stormvale or something like that, or just a small dungeon. It's never just straightforward. The most straightforward is like you fight through a dungeon and you get an item at the end. And usually that item is of some value to you. But like on the other end of the spectrum, like you get this massive, multi-layered, huge environment of a castle, and then at the end of it there's a boss fight, and then you get some meaningful upgrades, and you get some story out of it, and you can chart your own path through that world and approach anything exactly how you want. So the big issue with open world games is everything has, in order to make them big, is everything has a kind of uniformity, a plainness to it. You see that, and there's a formulaic nature to it. We see that with Ubi games, where it's like, here's the three types
Here's
of
my checklist.
Yeah, here's the three types of game missions or design missions that we have. You're going to do these over and over again, everywhere. Or Breath of the Wild has it as well. Breath of the Wild, an incredible game, but like there's a uniformity to those shrines, and it needed to be that way. Elden Ring definitely has some of that uniformity, but it does such a good job at having enough diversity that you don't feel that uniformity. And that is, I think, one of the most amazing things about it. You always feel like you've got something more for yourself, something unique, and you always feel like, I need to tell someone about this, even if you know deep down that they probably had something similar somewhere else. So I think like that level of authorship is incredible, and it's one of the things that really made it stand out all this time later.
Yeah, you touched on it, but I was definitely feeling sort of a open world fatigue, I guess. And when I heard that this was going to be an open world FromSoftware game, I was a little concerned because, as you're saying, I really liked those not linear but very controlled spaces that you were supposed to go through in a particular way. But I think Elden Ring, just right when you get out of that first tomb and you see the world before you and the map, it doesn't tell you everything that you're going to see. It picks and chooses the information that it wants to show you, and it feels like just an incredibly massive adventure where you can choose where you want to go, like what weapons you want to use, what you want to take on. You could stumble into an area that you're just not ready for, could back off, or you could find a way to cheese your way through it, or you could call in some friends and get through that dungeon like that. And I think it's just that level of freedom that has always been a kernel of those games, right? Like that's always been an important part in terms of like what build are you going to use, how are you going to play, what weapon are you going to use, what magic are you going to use. But I feel like it starts with that, but then it expands throughout the entire world, and it's such a memorable adventure. And I'm always like super curious to see how people got through a certain area. Like how did you get through Stormvale Castle? How did you beat this boss? How did you beat that boss? And just those conversations make that game so much more than just a game for me.
And like I've had some of the most memorable game experiences of my whole life playing that game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was playing it obviously before everyone else when I was reviewing it, and the kind of experience of opening a chest and suddenly being in Caelid and being like
transport a trap.
And not understanding what's going
not
on.
understanding and having those annoying bugs doing their homing attack on you and just being stuck and like being like, I'm not leaving here, I'm fighting my way out of this, like that. Going into the fact that one thing that you mentioned was it doesn't tell you that much. It tells you basically nothing. Like it's like figure this stuff out on your own. It's got the guidance of grace, which is like go in this general direction, and that's about it. So that feels antithetical to literally how every open world game is designed. I would guess there's probably designers out there who would say, if you want your players to see the content you're making, don't do this. And this feels like a very kind of like opposite direction approach for them. But because they do that, you can have moments where you get into a lift and the lift goes down and down and down and down, and then you appear in an underground civilization basically with its own starry night, and you're just like jaw-dropping vista in this area, and you're like fighting your way through that. And it's like I described it design by subtraction, and I said in my review that it's going to be remembered for what it doesn't do as much as what it does, and I really stand by that to this day.
I really hope it's some kind of, I mean, you know, in a cyclical way, this conversation's come around, where it's like so many people and so many designers and developers have taken a lot from Souls games. And one of the things I think has happened, particularly with open world design, is that they are so scared of you dropping off. Whereas Elden Ring proves that you can trust the player as long as you create a world that is interesting enough. And I really hope that is something that is taken from this game, because similarly to both of you, I've never felt such an, like, even with Breath of the Wild, it's a fantastic game, I love it, but I never felt like the regions were as distinct, or the discovery, the promise of discovery was as important or as interesting in Elden Ring. And, you know, coupled with the fact that I could just sword and board it if I wanted to, or I could just take on magic, or I could just do this, or I could just do that. And all those little quality of life upgrades that maybe would have been slightly off-putting to me. You know, I streamed trying to play Dark Souls, and going back to Dark Souls 1 after playing Elden Ring is like...
Fantastic, yeah.
I'm having to rewire my whole brain. But the way that, you know, they just make these little tweaks, and like getting rid of weapon durability, for example, you know, and just everything it can do to push you out into that world, I feel like Elden Ring does. And I think it is such a truly special experience. And there has been so much discourse. I feel like everything that can be said about Elden Ring probably has been.
I think there's a trust too that I have in FromSoftware, and I imagine a lot of players too. I feel like FromSoftware is uniquely positioned to remove a lot of that info because the players know that they are going to get something surprising, something interesting, something different than what they might see in other games. And
something that challenges them.
Something that challenges them, yeah. So like, it's interesting because for a lesser game, I may want more guidance on where to go, what to do next. But when it comes to FromSoftware and just that mastery that they have, I know I'm going to see it because I want to see it. And that is what's propelling me. It's not, it feels very organic.
Yeah, the kind of like rules of engagement are laid out, one by the studio's legacy, the history, and also at the very start of the game. Like if you came into that world and you were expecting it to be one thing and a game of a certain way, and then it was something like not giving you the information that you need to play it the way it's designed to be, that's a different thing. And I think that one thing that you touched on, Lucy, that's really important is like developers spend so much time, and it's not their fault, developers spend so much time creating these vast worlds that are like truly incredible and feel so immersive, and then kind of like rubber meets the road and they have to make a call on how people navigate through that. And often the smartest way to do it is to gamify it, which is kind of removes that immersion, and it kind of undoes a lot of the hard work of creating this world that feels livable and real and realistic by turning it into a video game. And FromSoftware, like Jake said, are in a position where they can be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do things that others would tell us is antithetical to good game design, but we can do that because we've trained our audience. And also, not to understate the actual design and balance that goes into making sure that you're still having a good time, even if you don't have the context to know how FromSoftware does their thing. You can approach a Stormveil Castle and realize I can't beat this boss, or I can't get through this, and there are ways to completely circumvent it if you want to, or you can go do something else. You're never required to beat each of the Elden Lords. You just need to beat a few of them and get what you need out of it. So there's definitely that kind of like smart design, as well as the braveness and boldness to just go in their own way. And we talked about it, and I talked about it in my article and also in this discussion, like FromSoftware, I think, are the most influential game developer of the past decade. And the question was, can they remain that? And I think Elden Ring is the game that shows they can still be as influential now as they were when they released Demon's Souls and Dark Souls. And if that doesn't earn you a Game of the Year award, I don't know what else can.
So even before releasing the game, many fans talk about this game a lot, and that help us increasing our motivation during the development. And after releasing the game, many fans, of course, played a lot, give us a good reputation about it, and that leads to us receiving this kind of great award from the GameSpot. So once again, we want to say thank you so much to all the fans out there. Thank you.